Welcome back to 1834. It's match 4, game number 3, and the score is 1-0 to Le Bourdonnais. Today's guest commentator is the son of God himself. He says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first move." So Le Bourdonnais immediately plays e4. McDonnell has many questions, but the game goes on. e5, and back in game number 1, McDonnell played a completely new move, which was bishop to c4, and here Le Bourdonnais trolls him by playing this same move back at him, but McDonnell is unperturbed. He carries on as Le Bourdonnais did with bishop to c5, and in that first game McDonnell played c3, but here Le Bourdonnais goes for knight to f3, so it's changed from here, but not really, because they just transpose right back into the same opening. Queen to e7 from McDonnell, castles, knight to f6, d4 attacking the bishop, so the bishop retreats, and we are in the same position as match 4, game number 1, move number 6. Le Bourdonnais actually won that game, and in that game McDonnell played at this point knight to a3, but Le Bourdonnais doesn't like that, so he goes for a genuinely new move, bishop to g5, pinning the knight, and this time there's no going back. McDonnell plays c6, and Le Bourdonnais continues to develop. We have h6 trying to chase away the bishop, so the bishop retreats, and here Jesus says, "The move thou shouldst make is knight on b to d7, showing wisdom and patience. Play with love and respect, and all will be well." But McDonnell plays g5 instead because he's aggressive and wants to attack. So the bishop goes back to g3, and McDonnell plays bishop to c7. Le Bourdonnais also brings back his bishop to b3, and yet another bishop move. This time McDonnell pins Le Bourdonnais's knight against the queen, so Le Bourdonnais unpins by going to e1. And finally, McDonnell develops his other knight to d7. The queen moves up to e3, getting closer to the center. We have knight back to h7 from McDonnell, and now h3 attacking the bishop, so the bishop captures the knight and the queen captures the bishop, and you can see that here Le Bourdonnais is lining up nicely on this pawn next to the king. Knight back to f8, and Le Bourdonnais's knight is going to head towards this nice outpost on f5. He's going to take this route, so he's going to start off with knight to c4. We have h5 from McDonnell, continuing to be aggressive on the king's side. Knight back to e3 as planned, and then f6 from McDonnell, but maybe this weakens the light squares too much here. As Jesus states, "Guard the light squares, lest they become thy enemy." Quite prophetic. The knight comes into f5 as planned, and this attacks the queen, so the queen moves across to h7. We have h4 from Le Bourdonnais trying to defend his king a little bit, and McDonnell backs up his pawns with his horse. We have rook on f to d1, but perhaps a good move would have been to anticipate the queenside castling with a4, but nonetheless, the rook comes across to d1. And indeed McDonnell castles, and Le Bourdonnais plays a4, better late than never. We have knight to f4 now from McDonnell, getting into the position here, but maybe it's not such a great move. As Jesus says, "It is oftentimes wise to rid thyself of a bad bishop, for they can be a hindrance to thy plans. Seek to exchange them if thou canst, and strengthen thy position thereby." And of course this knight move here does actually allow Le Bourdonnais to exchange his bad bishop, but he doesn't capture it straight away. Instead he pushes a5, trying to add more pressure to the queen side. McDonnell sort of ignores this for now, pushes d5, and the bishop comes back to c2, x-raying the queen in the corner. So the queen moves out of the way of the x-ray, and Le Bourdonnais finally picks up the knight. But McDonnell doesn't capture the bishop back straight away. First he pushes his g-pawn and threatens the queen, so the queen has to move. It goes back to e2, and now the pawn captures the bishop, and McDonnell has a nice array of pawns in front of the king, quite advanced here, so very nice. We have a6 from Le Bourdonnais, ignoring the pawns on his king side. We have b6, just strolling past it. The e-pawn captures the d-pawn, opening up the central file, so McDonnell puts a rook on it, threatening the white queen, so the white queen moves away to c4, also defending this pawn, which is attacked twice by McDonnell. But McDonnell just captures it with the queen, offering a queen exchange, which Le Bourdonnais accepts, and Le Bourdonnais challenges the central file here. McDonnell ignores it for now and tucks his king further into safety on b8. But this isn't such a great move, as Jesus says, "My child, the move bishop to a4 addeth to the pressure. The rook exchange will cause thine enemy to wail and gnash his teeth." Thank you, Jesus. The problem for McDonnell here is that he doesn't really have any good moves. His rook is stuck guarding the knight, which is being attacked by the bishop. If you try something else, let's try the king coming across to help. It's getting checked, it has to move back, and then it's getting forked, and you're losing your rook. And similarly, you're getting into trouble if you try something else. If you try to move the knight away, the knight's still coming in, and he has lots of forking ideas going on. So McDonnell is in a bit of a bind. However, it appears that his prayers have been answered because Bourdonnais doesn't go for Jesus's bishop to a4 idea. Instead, he plays his knight into e7, and McDonnell is okay again. He brings his knight across here, and it just leads to a knight exchange. The pawn captures here, and it's attacking the rook, so the rook moves aside to f7. Bourdonnais moves to defend his pawn, and McDonnell moves to attack the rook, so Bourdonnais gives it some backup, and we just have a simple rook exchange here on e6, and McDonnell continues attacking the pawn here. However, there is a chance here for Bourdonnais just to win the game. If he moves his rook back to e5, he can just hoover up the 5th rank pawns here, and he'll be sorted. But it seems that McDonnell's prayers have been answered once more because he doesn't do this. He plays bishop to g6 and attacks the rook instead. And I'll let Jesus take you through why this isn't so good. McDonnell is able to gird his loins and exchange the rook wisely, for it changes the game's dynamics. Let thy judgment guide thee. Okay, so opposite coloured bishops means the game is more drawish, although McDonnell's pawns do look a little bit weaker. They're being attacked already by the bishop here. So we'll see what happens. We have g3 from Bourdonnais, f-pawn captures, and f-pawn captures back. Now perhaps McDonnell should start thinking about centralising his king, but before he does that he pushes d4. And Bourdonnais decides he doesn't want to capture this because it would line up too nicely against McDonnell's bishop, so instead he strolls straight past to c4. We have king to c7 from McDonnell, and Bourdonnais starts capturing the wing pawns. d3 from McDonnell, and this is revealing an attack on the b pawn, so Bourdonnais brings it to safety. And here we have king to d6 from McDonnell. Bourdonnais continues to capture pawns, and now Bourdonnais is looking very strong with these connected pass pawns, but McDonnell is going to try to bring his king down the board to help the pawn across to promote here. So he starts out with king to c5. We have bishop to d1, anticipating needing to block it, and the king keeps coming. We have now king to f2 and king to c3, finally arriving next to the pawn. Bourdonnais moves his king up to e3 to help pressure the pawn, but the bishop comes in with a check, so the king moves to e4. But this allows the bishop to get on the back of the pawn chain and threaten all of the pawns, so the king moves to defend on f4. And now the black king progresses further to d2, threatening the bishop, so the bishop has to get out of the way. But now the king is in front of the pawn, so it needs to get out of the way to let it across. So it goes back to c3, and Bourdonnais brings his bishop back to d1. So we're repeating here, king to d2. But Bourdonnais doesn't want a draw. He wants to try something different so that he can win. He goes to g4 instead. We have king back to c3. And Bourdonnais plays his king to f3, which is a mistake. It enables McDonnell bishop to e1, which maintains an attack on the base of both pawn chains, and it will enable McDonnell to start picking off pawns and even out the game. However, McDonnell doesn't spot this, and he blows it with bishop to d4. Bourdonnais is able to play his king to e4, and the win is back on for him. This move reveals the defense of the d1 square by the bishop. I'll just give you a quick example winning line for Bourdonnais here. Bishop to f6, and then you actually place your bishop as bait for the king. So the king goes after it, and you start pushing your pawns. You actually let the bishop get captured. You capture the dangerous pass pawn back, and then you start pushing your connected pass pawns up the wing, and the dark squared bishop can't stop them. However, Bourdonnais did not spot this king to e4 move. Instead, he played bishop to f5, which is another mistake. Jesus. Ooh, sorry. Yeah, so the draw is back on. So the problem with this is that the bishop is now no longer able to defend the d1 square. It's only the king that can get there in time now. So McDonnell plays d2, and the king is forced to chase the pawn, king to e2. We have bishop to f2, and now it's on the back of the pawn chain. The king can't move to capture it without letting the pawn queen. So yeah, not so great. So instead, Bourdonnais pushes h5, and the bishop captures the remaining pawn here. Le Bourdonnais blocks the pawn with his king. McDonnell adds a defender to the pawn with his bishop, while simultaneously blocking the advance of the wing pawn. We have bishop to e6, and the bishop just stays on this diagonal. Bishop to h6, bishop to f5, bishop to g5, and it was here that they both agreed to a draw, as no more progress can be made. They're just going to shuffle their bishops around forever. So another close shave for McDonnell. It's still 1-0 to Le Bourdonnais in this fourth match. And Jesus said unto them, Verily, the game of chess is like life, for in both thou must strive to improve and face challenges with wisdom and courage. May thou always strive to play with honour and humility, for these qualities will bring thee success in all thy endeavours. I'll see you next time.